All right, hello and welcome, everyone. This is the last day of class. Uh, so um, we'll have a study session at the end of this, but we have to finish up the last lecture. And also hold your questions until I manage to get through the last little bit of Reconstruction. All right, so let me hit the share screen. Hey, it actually worked correctly this time. All right, so last time we left off, we were talking about the end of Reconstruction, how it came to end. Um, you know, we were talking a lot about like white supremacist violence, and how like even though the KKK had been suppressed, the groups like the White League um, were uh, were coming together to suppress the black vote, and saw a spate of lynching um and voter intimidation and that. But it wouldn't be until the 1870s really that you would see these tactics being successful, especially towards the mid 1870s. But as Democrats, known as Southern Redeemer Democrats, came about trying to redeem the South to its antebellum glory, as in instituting some form of white supremacy. Um, they continue to try to pass more and more vindictive laws against black people. This didn't really work out for them during Reconstruction because they couldn't intimidate enough black voters to stop voting to make the Republicans, who were pro civil rights, go away. But as more and more intimidation managed to suppress the black vote through violence, not through legal means, but through violence, eventually Southern Redeemers would institute laws that would disenfranchise black people through conniving ways. They wouldn't openly do it, but the first disenfranchisement laws would come after Reconstruction. But this also plays into what we have also discussed, which is the lost cause. This is a Southern myth that that it was the War of Northern Aggression and all that, but also that Reconstruction was purely to suppress the South. But to people with privilege, equality seems like suppression, and that's really what it came down to. Is that that what they saw as suppression was literally civil rights, and they didn't like the idea of black people being able to vote in Republicans. At this point, there were actually black people serving in Congress, and by the rise of Jim Crow, that wouldn't be the case for another 50 years. So the lost cause is built on a lot of this stuff. It's a very pernicious myth. And what helped them along with gaining more and more power in the South was that the North was losing its willingness to fund all of these efforts to keep the military down there. Now, the military wasn't particularly powerful in the South in the 1870s or even in the late 1860s. They were few and far between. These military departments, remember, go back. Yeah. These military departments, even though they cover massive amounts of territory, were operated by like a battalion or two. So we're not talking about a lot of people. We're talking like maybe about 1,500 soldiers to make up each military district. That's not much. So what really made it that the North wasn't willing to fund all of this, despite it being relatively inconsequential on the federal budget, was that there was a major depression that struck in 1872. I mean, 1873. Um, it's known as the Long Depression, and it actually lasted throughout the rest of the 1870s. Um, it's probably related to the aftermath of the Civil War, but economics are hard to say where a specific crash comes from, especially when we don't have as much data as we do today. Um, so it's just a guess that this is from the aftermath of the Civil War. Either way, it was a major depression and unemployment skyrocketed and all that kind of stuff, just like you would expect from any kind of depression. But it lasted for the rest of the decade. So Americans were less and less willing to have any kind of draw on the federal government's budget. Um, if it was because that meant that they would have to pay more taxes. Now, taxes at this point were not from income tax, they were from taxes on goods, tariffs, that kind of thing. But higher taxes on goods often meant a higher like sales tax, and that hurts people at the lower end of the pay scale worse than people who were rich. Um, Taxes at this point were very much dependent on poor people more than rich people. That's one of the great benefits of income taxes, that it actually um, distributes the burden much more equally. Um, Lincoln actually tried to pass income tax during the Civil War, and was going for a little bit, but it was technically unconstitutional. It would take a constitutional amendment to do that. So without all that money, the federal government was not able to fund Reconstruction against the will of the people. Um, what increased this was that the Grant administration just kept on getting in scandal after scandal. He was ridden with corruption. Um, Ulysses S. Grant is a great general, but a terrible president. Um, the He was embroiled in so many corruption scandals that it became kind of a mockery. Um, just to list a few of them, uh, like there was the New York Customs House embezzlement scheme in 1871. The Postal Star Route exposed cronyism, where they would favor a particular group of people for these premium star routes to run for the postal office, and then these people wouldn't actually do it because it was purely to get paid. Um, there was a hike in terms of the president's salary in 1873, and it's known as the Great Salary Grab, because he actually signed it into law faster than anything else in his administration. Um, kind of bad look. Um, in 1875, the attorney general was bribed to avoid prosecution openly, and that became a scandal. Um, then, of course, there was the 1875 whiskey ring. You get the idea. And of course, Custer's last stand in 1876 really exposed that Grant's entire peace policy in the West was not so peaceful. And there's a whole bunch more than that. Grant was about as scandal-ridden as our current president. Um, and he this also meant that a lot of people in the North were getting disenchanted with Republican rule. Grant was seen as a radical Republican, although I mean, he's not really a radical Republican. It's all he allowed radical Republicans to control Reconstruction policy, but he wasn't openly campaigning for um, harsher measures in the South or anything along those lines. Um, he just allowed it to keep going. But that became one of the key problems with his presidency. So when he was stepping down in 1870, when the election of 1876 came about and he was going to step down, it came to the next president to reconstruct Reconstruction. Um, and this was a particularly close election. Um, it was a contest between Tilden and Rutherford v. Hayes. Rutherford v. Hayes would end up winning, but not by the actual vote. It was so close that the election had to be thrown into the House of Representatives. And so they created an electoral commission. And Tilden at this point was running, well, not Tilden himself, but like Tilden supporters were running ads that were saying like Tilden or blood. They were basically saying that like if the Tilden was a Democrat, by the way, and Hayes was the Republican. Tilden supporters were basically threatening civil war again, and that's the real balance that was trying to be struck with Reconstruction, was trying to make them recognize civil rights while simultaneously not cause another civil war. um, the people had enough with death. Remember, 3% of Americans died in the Civil War, and 10% were casualties. So nobody wanted to have that again. And so when it was in Congress, the House created an electoral commission to sort out who would be president, and we don't really know how this deal was struck, but it's not often known as the corrupt bargain, where the presidency was handed over to Hayes, but it wasn't through vote counting. It wasn't through asking electors to change their votes or anything along those lines. It was through a legislative deal. There's no record of this bargain being struck, but essentially by the House handing over the presidency to Hayes, Hayes guaranteed that he would end Reconstruction. And so the Compromise of 1877, as it is known, ended Reconstruction with the passage of the Posse Comitatus Act, making it illegal for the U.S. Army to be used as a posse, as in law enforcement. You can't bring in the Army for law enforcement unless you're out in the territories. That was an exception to that. But the essentially, by the Posse Comitatus Act, Reconstruction was officially ended. Troops had to be pulled out of the South. There were no more military districts, and civil rights were left up to the states to work out. But it actually didn't immediately affect Black people. The disenfranchisement had to be won through violence first. And the White League and and Red Shirts and other groups amped up their effort in the late 1870s and early 1880s to disenfranchise Black people through voter intimidation. After they managed to secure a what's known as a solid South, as in the South became a single block of Democrats, like basically guaranteed, and the South would move as a whole on any national issues. So at that point, it was finally time that they could pass laws to disenfranchise Black people, starting in 1888 with the first poll tax, um, and not until the mid 1890s when you started seeing full implementation of what became known as Jim Crow. Um, this was disenfranchisement of Black voters, then segregating Black people altogether, so that there was a full apartheid in the South. Um, and that is the ultimate legacy of Reconstruction, is a failed revolution. That the civil rights acts and that were passed um, in 1866, 1871, and 1876, um, all failed to continue the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, and so it would fall on the 1950s and 60s Democrats to fix what their party had failed um, at that point. There would be a significant party switch because of civil rights. And eventually, the Democrats would lose the South and Republicans would sweep that in the late 20th century. So, um, that's where we're going to leave off, is this kind of sad note that Reconstruction failed. Hold on a second while I end the screen share. There we go. So, we're going to do a bit of a study session in that, and I'm going to hand that over to Kevin. Kevin, you need to enable your camera. But before I go, is there any questions? Oh, and also the test will be available tomorrow, and will be available for a full week. So there are don't forget to take it or anything, but there's one thing I want to let you all know about. I am going to be eliminating whatever the worst grade that you have on your of your grades. So if you have a test that is bogging you down, I will render that grade null, and hopefully that will help boost all of your grades. So that is that's something to keep in mind. If you're happy with your grade, there's you should still take the test and everything, but don't be afraid that that it might lower your grade, because I will eliminate that grade if it does. As such, also don't forget that there's not just the test, but also the reading response, the reading journal, which is due by Wednesday. It's just 100 words of your thoughts for each week. Hopefully you've been doing that all semester long. And you'll turn it in and on Learn. Remember, it will be on Learn. So any questions?
So you're talking about the final, right? That's going to be up for a week, and that's our only test?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the final. You'll have 10 words to say what, like, to identify and what their significance is. Remember, it's all about significance. If you just identify something as, like, it is I don't know, what's an example from last one? Let's say the War of 1812. You just say it's a war that happened in 1812. Yeah, you're probably only going to get about 20%.
Is it going to be timed as well?
It will be timed, but you'll have plenty of time. It's going to be like 4 hours.
Okay.
It's basically so that you can't, jump from that to, come back and forth to it. Um, it is trying to find out if you are thinking about this stuff, not because it's that's ultimately what significance is. It's whether or not it's what you think of um, why this is important to American history. Um, so there's any number of ways of thinking about it. Kevin will go through a lot of that in just a little bit. Um, so you will have 10 of those this time rather than the 5 of last time. But you'll also have double the time. So um, is there any further questions?
I have a question.
Mhm.
For the reading journals, is it okay if it's like a running document? Because like I just have them all in one document, including the ones from the first one, or does it need to be two separate ones?
It should all be in one document. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Um, yeah, you don't want to be turning in. How many weeks is this? Like 7, I think. You don't want to be turning in 7 separate documents.
No, I meant like from like the first reading journal that we did,
Oh, okay.
and
Yeah,
then
you can turn it in as like that you just have the first half from last time if you want to. Kevin will be able to differentiate.
okay,
Um,
cool,
but you know, if you want to just turn it in as only the second half, that's fine too.
cool. Thank you.
Any other questions? All right. Well, I'm going to turn it over to Kevin, but first let me hit the stop recording.